explaining that it doesn't make sense.
Passport number.
Don't worry, you can fill it in.
Good.
One moment. Okay. Le quatrième, et maintenant on compte 5 minutes la personne qui est rentrée.
Date.
Oui, ça c'est pas aussi. Les personnes, c'est pas grave parce que. Non, ça va. Ok, thanks. Don't worry, it's fine. And I'll see you later. Okay. Good luck. See you.
Is the sequence?
You're the last
in the program, so where is everybody here?
No,
Did you see everybody?
yeah, there's only Bashkim Idris is missing.
Okay, so possibly that will switch to that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyhow, I will come around a bit earlier. So.
Do you want me to give you an SMS? Send you an SMS if he's here.
I can type it down.
No, I'll put it immediately in my phone. If I need you, I will send you an SMS. If I need you earlier. So that's 00.
49.
Is it?
Yeah, call me.
Wait. This way? Because my brother is also Stefan, so I was going to call him.
No, here? Let's go to just listening.
Yes. Hello. Here with a voicemail.
Can you change the number?
No.
Replace the plus with a 0 with plus.
Okay, start. Got it? Okay. All right, it's 2 o'clock. Welcome everybody to this session on spatial planning. My name is Katarina Bams, and I will be your chair for today. Before we start, just some practical elements. We've been asked to always use the microphone because of the videotaping, okay? I have a question to the public, to the participants. Is it okay that we have the questions each time after each PowerPoint? Is that okay? Yeah? Or do you want it at the end? All questions at the end? After each presentation, okay? We have the speakers here in the front row. They are all experienced speakers, so I'm confident that you will stick with the time, which is maximum 15 minutes, so that we have time for questions. 2 minutes before, I will do the peace sign. Okay. All right. Let's kick off then. I would like to call Roger Longharm from GSDI Association to start the first presentation.
All right, thank you, Katrina. Hello, everyone, this afternoon. The first thing I'd like to say is I've changed the title of my presentation, but just a little bit, about multi-agency cooperation for implementing the EU marine directives, because there's more than one. And the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive, that was my original title. The plans don't have to be ready until 2021, so a lot of people haven't started too much on it yet. What I'd like to focus on after a brief introduction to the two marine directives that we'll talk about today are the challenges And I was speaking to some of the Inspire staff earlier today. I think we should have changed the title for the conference. Inspiring a Digital Europe, Thinking Out of the Box. I think it should have been Inspiring a Digital Europe, Meeting the Challenges Ahead, because there's still so much work to be done before we start thinking out of the box. But that's just my introduction. I'm going to look very briefly just at the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, MSFD, from 2008, which was recently amended this year, and the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive of 2014. It's the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive is the newest directive, and the plans are not required to be produced by member states until 2021. So there isn't, I wasn't able to find too much existing today on multi-agency cooperation leading to that yet. What I want to focus on in the presentation is why more and more agencies will need to cooperate to start satisfying the reporting and monitoring requirements of these directives. Both the directives do mention Inspire specifically, both in the preamble and in the articles, because they're supposed to be building on Inspire-compliant harmonized data. They both also specifically mention coastal lands and land-sea interaction. So it's not just the marine community that you might think of offshore. So why are we interested here? It's the coastal area, which is a really complicated area to work in, because that's where the land people meet the sea people. And that makes it more complicated. This is all of the work that's happening in the marine directives is part of the integrated maritime policy. You see, it's a very complicated initiative to try to create all the sea-related policies. And if you look at that list on the left, you can start to begin to understand who has to participate in helping implement these policies. Everything from fisheries, shipping, the marine environment, offshore energy, the tourism. These are completely different groups of stakeholders. And yet they're all feeding into to helping develop the integrated maritime policy. And the picture on the right, which gives you some idea, just an idea of the different sectors that are involved. That's the key takeaway from this slide. How many different people have to work? Now, the Inspire, which was developed mainly by land-based topographic-oriented mapping agencies or agencies, cadastral agencies, land registries. I've been involved with Inspire since before it was Inspire, since probably 2002. So it's been difficult sometimes to work in the marine component. However, if you look at the 34 data themes, 12 of them directly relate to marine environment, 10 more or less directly relate to marine environment, and 10 are related to the coastal environment, i.e. what happens in the coastline, because it is land-based as well as being sea-based. One of the issues that came up in finding access to harmonized interoperable data from Inspire was where they appeared in the annexes, i.e. this had to do with when the harmonized data had to be made available. And a lot of the data we're looking at in these directly related marine themes don't have to be finished, don't have to be made harmonized until 2020, 2021. So again, when we had a workshop on this on Monday afternoon at Kale, the people that are trying to implement, for example, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive pointed out, well, it would be good if we had the data available, but we just don't have it yet because we haven't had to, and we're still working on it. There's also a lot of debate still exists around the data models, the thematic clusters that are looking at marine. I think the messages coming through to Kieran Millard and some of the group are, it's too complex, it's not complex enough, how do we implement this? A lot of questions arising around the data modeling that was built in. Again, I think partly because as a member of one of the thematic working groups, when we were developing the Inspire specifications, the only reason Marine got involved in our specification in a little way was because a bunch of us in the TWG were Marine people. And if you were doing, the people in the cadastre group did land cadastre. They were all land-based cadastral people. If you wanted to talk about marine cadastre, well, there aren't many in Europe at all, and there was nobody there anyway to actually raise that issue. The maritime spatial planning generally, this isn't just a directive, is basically there to reduce conflicts, create synergies, encourage investment, work with cross-border cooperation, which is a key issue in Europe. The ocean is not a very good, or even the coastline, a good abider of national boundaries. Water tends to move, fish move, resources move, and to protect the environment. Marine protected areas is a huge new area globally, not just in the EU, but there's a big drive now to protect more of the ocean, to help develop fisheries, etc. Specifically on MSF, the Marine Strategy Planning Directive, Maritime Spatial Planning Directive, 2014, it's a fairly new directive. It was deadline, as I say, for establishing the maritime spatial plans is until 2021. So again, if it's supposed to be using INSPIRE harmonized data, it's not too surprising that not too much has been done yet by many of the coastal states on doing maritime spatial planning, except for those who already do this at national level anyway. And there's a comment on that. In the directive, it mentions the land-sea interactions, the coastal uses. I guess one of the clauses that I find more or less disturbing is, if member states apply terrestrial planning to coastal waters or parts thereof, this directive does not apply to those waters. I mean, I'm American, I live in Belgium, I have a house in the UK, I do a lot of work with the UK coastal communities. They have done massive maritime spatial planning for the coastlines. I mean, some of the examples I used in our workshop all came from the UK. They already exist as part of their own territorial planning activity. Does that mean none of these would be covered under the directive, even if they were still in the EU after 2019? It seems to be a bit of a strange clause to be added in here. It was probably put there at the request of certain member states. And again, preamble or paragraph 24 specifically mentions using the best available data and says using INSPIRE. So we've got these two references to INSPIRE built into the directives themselves. Article 5 of this directive talks about considering economic, social, environmental aspects and looking at all different sectors: energy sector, maritime, transport, fisheries, environment, climate change. Just keep in mind that each one of these sectors has a whole group of stakeholders around it, a whole number, in some cases, multiple government agencies already working, for example, in maritime transport. So when it comes to collecting the data, harmonizing the data, using the data to do the maritime spatial planning and the MSFD reporting, it gets very complicated. Setting up the maritime spatial plans, it's not too prescriptive. It says, identify the spatial temporal distribution, use relevant interactions of activities and uses. In one sense, I think of maritime spatial planning, MSP, as being a descriptive directive. It's like PSI reuse when it came out in 2003, Article 9, do something. I mean, you're supposed to make your information available. It had 2 sentences, do something. And then the revised PSI Reuse Directive 2013 said, oh, by the way, do this. Use standards, publish metadata on the internet, blah, blah, blah. And INSPIRE, of course, went away a bit over the top the other way. Do all of these things exactly as we say in an EC regulation. This one is more or less saying, do these things relating to these activities, but we're not really prescribing to you yet how it's done. And part of that is because maritime spatial planning depends upon or relates to the type of plan you're doing, the type of coastline you're working in. If you're a Spanish or Portuguese island in the Med or in the Atlantic, or if you're a coastline, they have different purposes. And these are, what Article 8 lists is activities. It doesn't list any data. It just lists activities. So these are all the sorts of activities you're supposed to include in your maritime spatial plans. Article 10 is kind of where it actually talks about, it just tells you to decide how to organize the sharing of information. It doesn't say what you have to do, but then paragraph 3 says, oh yeah, you might want to use the INSPIRE directive. Again, it doesn't even say you have to use it, but you should use available tools and data sets, so maybe you should be looking at INSPIRE. The Marine Strategy Framework Directive predated this one. That came out in 2008, trying to develop a program for monitoring good environmental status, GES, through a massive data collection initiative, reporting every 6 years. The first one came out in 2012, the next is 2018. And this is the people who were attending our workshop in KL who pointed out, yes, we're trying to do this now, but a lot of the marine data we need just doesn't exist as a harmonized data set yet. So we're using the best data we have, and that's all you can do at the moment. Unfortunately, because a lot of that data still won't be harmonized until 2020, 2021, the next report is due next year. So they're still just using the data sources they have. We're hoping that post-2021, when they do the next one in 2024, it'll be easier to do the next 6-year report for MSFD. Strategy, what does it involve? There was the initial assessment of good environmental status, the environmental impact in your marine regions, what you had to define where the regions were. We had massive discussions on what the regional boundaries should be. Determining what good environmental status means, because it may not always mean the same thing for each country, or even with different areas within a country, and getting the targets, setting up the monitoring program, and the goal is to come up with an agreed set of reaching good environmental status by 2020. I think we should already be thinking about extending that to beyond 2020. But that's what life is about when you're working at a pan-European level. Again, in this directive, it actually mentions in the preamble using INSPIRE data. It talks about, specifically in the article as well as the preamble, the directive as it applies to access and use rights in respect of data and information resulting from these initial assessments. So it's a specific reference to using the access and sharing part of the INSPIRE directive to make sure the information is made available. And then Annex 3, which was the only really descriptive annex, and it was only a few pages long, in MSFD, that itself was modified in 2017, May this year, because of what they learned in 2012 doing the first assessment of good environmental status. This was difficult to report. It's what they call a sort of an interactive implementation regime for MSFD at the moment. Again, all of the marine directives, both the marine directives, none of this is being reported or monitored in a vacuum. The other directives, many of which are actually mentioned in the Maritime directives, Nitrates Directive from 1991, runoff of nitrates into rivers, into seas, into coastal areas. The Habitats Directive, Natura 2000, the Water Framework Directive is mentioned frequently. Access to Environmental Information Directive, indirectly, is supposed to make your environmental information available. The Bathing Water Directive, the INSPIRE Directive setting up the standards, the Birds Directive for water birds. So, and then they work within different systems. The Shared Environmental Information System, which isn't really a system, it's like an umbrella. The Water Information System for Europe, WISE, and the WISE Marine component. EIONet from the EEA, EMODNet, the European Marine Observation Group, Copernicus Marine Activities. Tons of stuff is already going on that affects the marine community and has marine stakeholders in it already. So for my last two slides, on the challenges. So what are the challenges? From the multi-agency point of view, the different directives have different objectives, and that then produces different implementation requirements and strategies and monitoring regimes. But they're all still in the marine area. They're all still part of the integrated maritime policy. They have different focuses: environmental status, environmental sustainability, economic growth. It involves a lot of different combination of complex data, again, from different users, from different stakeholder groups. The timelines vary. MSFP was a directive requiring reporting 1 year after INSPIRE was published, not even adopted. So it's kind of hard to be using INSPIRE data to report on a directive before you even have to do anything. And then they change over time. The directives are amended over time. INSPIRE has been amended and probably will be yet again. MSFD has been amended just this year based on initial activities. So this leads to uncertainty and who you need to do the work, what agencies need to do the work, how do you keep them all engaged, that is a key challenge. Then there's different levels of legislation for implementing different parts of the integrated maritime policy. We have the directives, we have decisions from the MSFP, we have regulations from INSPIRE, which are law the day they're published. We have recommendations like the ICZM Integrated Coastal Zonal Management Recommendation 1999. These are all different types of legal instruments which have different impacts on how you implement something, or perhaps the impetus that your government agency puts into implementing whatever this legal instrument is saying. These then lead to a wide and diverse range of stakeholders and agencies, not just government, but also non-governmental agencies, certainly from the INSPIRE point of view, where they're doing work for INSPIRE or for a government body. And in the marine world, for example, port authorities. Most port authorities are private companies, right? There are some national, but in the UK certainly, and a lot of other areas, they're private companies, but they have to be an important input to these marine directives. So they have to be implied. Different directives. So to me, I think it requires an unprecedented level of multi-agency cooperation. And so I put the big question: is INSPIRE helping with implementation of those maritime legislative instruments and their reporting requirements, or not, or yet? And if not, why not?
Thank you very much. Excellent, within time. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. Any questions?
Oh, good.
Yes.
Hi, Aurélie Moulin from Chima Research Foundation. I was wondering, I'm not fully sure that the marine spatial planning is really put in force in order to protect the environment. I think that at the end, the marine spatial planning is more think in the way that we have to use better to produce a blue growth than
Yes,
protect the
yeah.
environment. So in this case, I think that there are other instruments, other directives that will answer to the protection, but that will have to be considered in another way for the spatial marine planning. That
Or
won't be easy, for sure.
Or even the next amendment to the MSFP itself. Who knows what's going on? And they have to fit into international initiatives like GEO, the Blue Planet Initiative GEO, because the EU member states have signed up to GEO Blue Planet, the Group on Earth Observations. So there's lots of other international things driving in that as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Sorry, I have a question. I got a bit slightly depressed by all the problems that you mentioned, the challenges. Sorry.
Challenges.
We don't
have
say
no
problems, challenges, yes. But and although you changed the title, I do wonder, do you have a recommendation regarding the multiple agency cooperation then? Do you have already
Not
vision
yet.
or how do you see?
The reason my presentation changed radically about 10 days ago, we started running a survey of identified potential stakeholders around the EU using a survey, online survey activity to see, what do you even know about these two directives? Are you cooperating? Are you working? Who do you cooperate with? And sending out something like 60, 65 named individuals. I had 5 replies back by 2 weeks ago. So I think part of that was July, August holiday intervening in Europe, but we're continuing that and conducting that again. And also I've learned a lot more now here, just at the conference, meeting people, even at the workshop, who are directly involved in MSFP, trying to get the Marine Strategy Framework Directive in place, the issues they are having. And they are giving me good information, certainly from the German point of view. A lot of cooperation is taking place. But it's difficult to find that just on the web. And if people aren't going to respond to our survey questions, then it's also difficult to collect that information. But we are still continuing with that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. I would like to call the next presentation is Lisa Schröder from Aalborg University.
Did we have it? Yes. I think perhaps it's no. This one? No. This one? Yes. Yes. Good. Thank you. Yes. Hello. My name is Lisa Schröder. As Katrina just said, I'm an associate professor at Aalborg University in Denmark, in Copenhagen, even if it says Aalborg, a little mix up of the geography. And I'm involved in a project, the Baltic Lines, an Interact project going on. It started last year, going on for 2 more years. And in this part of the project, which I am going to present, we are working closely together with SEAWETRA from the Finnish environmental organization and HELCOM, the Baltic Sea area organization, building an infrastructure for actually working with, as a platform for working with the MSP. So that's why we chose the title, Inspire Backbone in Spatially Enabling the Digital Maritime Society in the Baltic Sea region. Yeah, and I'll just find the button. Yeah, so I'll tell you just very little about the Baltic Lines project, a little about HELCOM's map and data service that we are working with, some data needs of MSP in the Baltic Sea region, which is related to the project we are doing, a little about how we have been dealing with this issue about availability of data, as Roger Longhorn just talked about, and then just a little glimpse of the prototype, we call it base maps, and a little about some next steps and a few conclusions. As I said, the project is going on, so there will be more for the coming years. Yeah, as I said, it is an Interact project starting last year, and it has a specific focus on developing pan-Baltic planning solutions for shipping routes and linear infrastructures, linear energy infrastructures. As we just heard, of course, maritime spatial planning is much more than this, and it is about doing it as a kind of prototyping process, actually getting people into working with those challenges, as Roger also mentioned, and actually trying to, also by doing some of the initial work on creating solutions and platforms, actually getting getting it obvious for all the parties, the stakeholders, the national authorities around the Baltic Sea, how necessary it is to actually establish common solutions that can provide and enable this platform. So the main focus on what I'm going to tell you about today is this further developing HELCOM's map and data service, which is a central element in the project as a means of enabling collaboration in the region and the processes going on. As Roger just said, it varies a lot how the countries are doing in those processes. In Denmark, for instance, the Danish Act referring to the directive only were set into action last year. So we have just started, and the Maritime Spatial Plan will only be finished just about the deadline. So it's a very good example of what we have just heard. Just a little about the service. We have this service as we know it from other solutions, and it has been refined since last year. Things has been going on also on the existing solution, and I'll not go much into it. It has all those different layers which HELCOM is collecting and making accessible for the users. It's freely available. You just see some of the shipping routes, and of course download the possibilities and metadata as we know it. And the main point in creating the new solution is to go from this situation where we have data stored in the central database, making it available for the users, into a solution where we actually retrieve the data on the fly and can get access to it immediately to be searched for, viewed, and downloaded. And of course, there's a lot of challenges in doing that. So as part of the project, we have done a survey among the planners involved in the project. Planners from all countries are around the Baltic Sea region, part of some of, you could say, the countries involved in HELCOM, not Russia, but the EU countries. Are involved, and the planners have been asked, and of course a big aspect of it is to be able to plan across the borders. If you are doing a plan for a wind farm, you just talked about the blue growth, of course it's important to know if we have plans for doing some more protections and just outside our own borders. And we need to know how it is going to be, also not just based on the existing data from perhaps last year. So of course that is very important to have newly updated data. And as we already have got an impression of, there's big differences among the countries, both concerning the way of dealing with the planning processes, and also concerning the availability of data and the services providing the data for use. So in the approach to the project as such is we call a fit-for-purpose approach. From a planner's perspective, it's not necessarily important to have a lot of complex data sets. We need to have the central data sets necessary for actually being able to have this broad picture when doing the plan across the borders. Of course, there's also a need for more specific data, and a lot of other projects are going on, and also some of them focusing much more into some of the more complex solutions for ecosystem-based services and things like that. And even if we have this main focus on the linear infrastructures, on shipping lines and energy, of course it relates to how planning is going on in the broader perspective. And concerning establishing the solution here, a very important part is to focus on the semantics. As I'll just show a little example where we see something in Finnish where we don't understand anything if you're not from Finland. So of course there's a lot of challenging actually getting data into a format that you can use them and find them, not least. Yeah, and which I told you is about not too complex. So it's about actually focusing on which attributes are the important ones. Yeah, and we have been building on the work going on also in other projects, and we collected, based on some of the data set that had been set up as the main backbone. We have consulted the planners and found out that we will have those 27 data sets that will be in those categories that we see here. A little different, of course. A lot of basic stuff about the administrative borders and different nature and species conservation sites and protected areas are important, even if we have this, as I said, even if we have this more narrow focus on shipping lines and energy. Of course, actually planning for this kind of solutions, it is an important part of the holistic planning approach anyway. Yeah, and this is just the whole illustration of the data sets and the availability, and I will not go in details, and the time is running. But just to illustrate that we have gathered the picture of how which data is actually available in the different countries. We have a lot of big tables. I'll not show them, and also relating them to the Inspire annexes. And especially a lot of data, as Roger also said, is relating to the Annex 3 data sets, which are not available at the moment. Yeah, so I'll just run through, and they will be in the slides as well, and you will see. Yeah, I don't think I'll not have time to go into it. So it's just the main. Table I have split up into those smaller ones. Yeah, so the point is that most countries do not yet have available data in the WMS or VFS format. We have a lot of cross-border issues. Data sets are not harmonized, and major data aspects as well, especially the language issue. And the availability of linear infrastructures, fixed installations, and shipping lanes in open formats, they will not be. You could say the time perspective of the project is not up to, because it's ending already in 2019, and the data will hopefully be more of them will be available when we get to 2020 and further on. And therefore, we have to actually try to deal with what can we do in order to actually create a solution at the moment where we don't have access to those data. Yeah, the system as such is based, as I said, on a prototyping process. We have this focus on the shipping data and the energy data and the related data in planning for those aspects, and we have this system based on open components and a distributed database system, as I just started to illustrate before, and it has to be very user-friendly. So that is what is going on right now at the moment, trying to establish this solution, and the prototype is already functioning. We call it the Baltic Sea map service, base maps, and here's just one of the illustration of how you will meet. Some of the information, if you go into it, this is some of the Finnish data, which is not that easy to understand, and just to find out which kind of data set are we talking about is quite. So that's one of the things going on, how to deal with that. Yeah, so how to proceed? Keep following closely the data availability in each country, of course, because all the countries are involved in the project. it is easy to get in contact with people, but still it's quite difficult to get the data. Some of but because it gets obvious how important it is, this kind of project also makes the participants actually do something, and some other implementations of small parts of getting data is going on, and especially in some of the Baltic countries where they are not that far with having data available. But at the moment, until we have the full solution, we will work with the data which is already stored. It is almost there. Yes. And we have a lot of data just newly updated by the HOLAS-2 project, one of the HELCOM projects. So there's quite a good basis for actually trying to establish a solution to be able to plan on this background at the moment, even if we still need access to the news data. Yeah. So once again, a very pragmatic approach to doing the system. So, conclusions. Most countries still do not have datasets available in open standard format necessary for implementing MMSDI, not even one single dataset covered by all countries. That's a little amazing. VMS is available in more countries than VFS, so we are building our service on the VMS, even if, of course, in the broader perspective later on, it would be nice to have VFS available. And I mentioned about that because the project is ending already in 2019. We can't benefit that much of the process going on in relation to Inspire data. But data is available due to other projects, it should have said, and HELCOM has a lot of data already that we can base some of our work on. Just some acknowledgements. The three organizations I just mentioned are part of the actual work, and then we have been basing our work on a lot of things going on, and other projects will also base their work on what we are doing here. And this is just the partners involved in the projects. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I was hoping it would be a bit more positive than the first one, but sorry. Do we have questions in the public?
Just a quick question. There's been a lot of projects over the last 15, 20 years in the Baltic, marine area under Interreg and FP and everything else. They all have something to do with marine spatial planning in one sense. Have any of these projects, or anything that you're working on now, have you looked at cost-benefit studies? Have you looked at any economic analysis and economic drivers for doing this sort of planning? Something that really excites the stakeholders to want to participate in these activities? Or is it all just because of legislation, so we must do something?
Well, I think probably at the moment where there is so much focus on getting the process actually going on in the different countries, there will be more focus also on the economic benefits. Because, for instance, in Denmark, where this process has just started, there's a lot of emphasis on getting the stakeholders involved, and of course, if they should do that, they should see the point in doing so. So I think there'll be also more studies on what are the benefits, but because the process is so early, is in such an early stage, I think that's perhaps a reason for it haven't yet. Yes, I guess.
Any other questions? I have a question because I'm a bit surprised, of course, to see that Inspire is about sharing data. Ideally, in a harmonized format, all the technical details. So I was wondering, if you say the data are not available, is it because the countries don't want to share it at this point in time because they say it's not Inspire compliant, conformant yet, or is it really they don't have it ready? How doom and gloom is the picture, or is it coming up?
a lot of it is about not having it ready. But of course, there's also data sets that will not be available. When we are talking about energy infrastructures, there's a lot about security, for instance, which makes it very, very difficult to actually get access across the borders. So I think one thing is a platform like HelpComs in the form that we see it now, where it is freely available for everybody to use. But some of the things that we have been discussing also is that perhaps there could be some kind of limited access for the national planners to some kind of data, but still there could be things that would be restricted even if that would be part of the solution. But there is a lot of challenges to security and other. But at the moment, a lot of it is also about that things are not ready, and the planners have just started a process actually gathering information for their own countries to see what they are going to use, building up their MSDIs as such. But of course, it makes. Of course, we hope that a project like this will put so much focus on the needs for cross-border collaboration that when building up the national MSDIs, that will be part of the premises that will be taken into account. We hope that, of course.
One more question.
Alessandro Sarretta from the Institute of Marine Science, Italy. My question is more about whether in this context of MSP or before in the other initiatives in the Baltic Sea, are you aware of any study on data policies and accessibility in the different sectors related to MSP, a part of research? Usually research areas has more widely sharing policies. I'm wondering about different sectors, if there are studies about the different policies.
Actually, in our project, we have focus on policies as well. But of course, especially concerning the two topics that we focus on. And other projects have also focus on the policies. So of course it is part of understanding how MSP is going on. And there are a lot of projects in the Baltic Sea, as Roger just mentioned, and they have different focus on different aspects, and in different ways they have focus also on the policies. So you are welcome to send me a mail, then I can. Because a lot is going on, actually, and also in that regard.
One more.
Yeah, Joris Ananias from the Space Institute for Northeast Uses of Satellites. My question, I recall that there was a project in the Aalborg University that based on the Copernicus data, they developed a study that found out that some species, I can't remember whether it was in the North Sea or in the Baltic Sea, I think it was in the North Sea, that depending on the rise of the temperature of in the coastal waters, only 1 degree could mean the migration of some species, local species, which could alter the ecosystem in the area. Have you done any study in this regard as far as maritime ecosystems is concerned?
We have a focus on ecosystems as such as, of course, the framework for dealing with MSP. And some of the other projects are also a project we have just started up ourselves. Actually, a bonus project. We have specific focus on the ecosystem aspects and some also starting to look into the different modeling issues that you could actually build this kind of decision support systems on. But a lot of things are going on, and also other projects having more specific focus on fisheries and others. So
thank you.
The same answer as to the previous one. So much is going on, so I can't just mention it, but a lot is going on also in that regard.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm putting all my hope on a positive message now on Aurélie Moulin from the CIMA Research Foundation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm here to add some information about marine spatial planning and how also we can use a web platform in order to support this directive, specifically in this case for the conservation of marine mammals. And in the Pelagos Sanctuary, that was the first international protected site created not to protect against fisheries, but to protect against the evolution on the environment. So that was not an easy job. So obviously there is a huge background that not only in the European Commission, but also in the case of the United Nations. And we are speaking of marine spatial planning, but there is the ECOAP initiative that is a mix between marine spatial planning and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. Then there are also other organizations that aim in these policies in order to protect these maritime areas. In all cases, we can suppose there is a goal about green environmental status, the idea to reuse information, not necessarily to create it, and obviously increase the interoperable systems and data in order to plan better on cross-border frontiers. This kind of data might be static, but it might be obviously dynamic. And when I'm speaking about cetaceans, we cannot think as a box, but we have to think that those mammals move around. And this is a tricky thing. We cannot just protect them in a fixed area, but we have to protect them in a dynamical way. And this, we are not good yet to understand it, to put measure about it. And then obviously we've got the different parts, different kind of observation models or modeled forecasts, the distributions. In this case, on Inspire, what specifically interests us is protected sites, species distribution, habitat and biotopes, transport networks, oceanographic features, sea regions. But what was particularly interesting for us was the idea to plot them on a grid, on a defined grid that should be shared between the country and shared between the thematics in order to allow an overlap. At this point, help to do the marine spatial planning. Why cetaceans? Well, cetaceans are descriptors in the different directives, so for sure it's important for those directives, but also they are descriptors of a huge amount of trophic web. So, however, they are not everywhere. They are really specified or not specified, so each type of marine mammals can bring an information on different type of scale. In our case, the Ligurian Sea is a oceanographic complex area with a huge human impact. So that's why a quite challenge to put everything together. The web platform is allowed to plot observation, models, statistics, and statistic tool, sorry. But then this platform was made on the origin. The big sister is the SEAWETRA, was made for the civil protection, and the idea was to use all the data, especially from dynamic fields. So it might be remote satellite data, but also some pluviometry in specific points, and use all those kind of data that are really complex and a huge big data to analyze that to have the civil protection in Italy. Now we have exported this platform in the different countries, And SEAWETRA was a kind of little sister that tried to now analyze the marine data in a way for the conservation. So it's not developed as well than the big sister, let's say. In this case, we are speaking of the second generation of the platform, and in this is quite a more easy user because you've got the use of the tag and the folder. The folder is typically like GIS, while tag is more keyword, so it's lets you more easily find your layers that you want to identify. In this case, you've got obviously the current services that normally on the web platform you've got zoom on, off of the layer opacities, and you can modify the metadata. And especially in this case, the metadata was conform with Inspire with Inspire Directive. In this case, this shows in our case we have decided to use a GeoPortal software. Another thing that we have implemented is possibilities, for example, in case of temporal features, to choose, when you use an etcdf, you can have different parameters, different time, and you can choose different also scale. Why? Because if you plot the sea surface temperature on winter and on summer, the scale is totally different. And if you are the end user, according to the scale on which you want to work, obviously a fixed legend, a fixed scale, cannot work. So at this point we implement, for example, using the Copernicus information. In this case, you've got twice the same data. With this changing the scale, you can see some features that you might not see before. The collection of cetaceans was, in this case, we tried to has as much as information we need. So, for example, using ferry, whale watching trips, or dedicated research platform. In this case, for example, we've got a list of cetaceans that we can find in our areas, and clicking on the point, then you can have eventually some information that you've got on the right part of the screen, with some information directly linked to this feature. Obviously, one thing that was quite interesting is Inspire Directive. They ask to link, because the name, the Latin name can be different, and the common name can be a lot. At this point, we linked it directly. You click on a link, and you've got directly this name with a different country name also. So this helps end user also to understand what you are talking about. Obviously, you can also have a filter, so you can decide which species you want to use, and at this point, you can plot the species, you can plot the track of the boat that monitors has obtained this observation, so you've got the boat track and the cetacean sightings according to the time frame. We implement also some of the products from Copernicus and MyOcean. For example, the sea surface temperature, chlorophyll, sea level, wind field, and also other models. So this is used to understand where are the cetaceans and what type of habitat you've got on this place. Another thing that we implement was a dynamic layer proposed by GRC. As a fin whale habitat model. So the fin whale is the most abundant whale with plates. And this model is supposed to help as a researcher to verify if this model is working. So that's why we plot in the platform. But also, eventually, the idea was to add that to the marine spatial planning eventually, to propose a tool to mitigate the collision problem with marine transport. Going on the marine transport, there is a huge things to do because the IS is
for the moment, not much use for protected sites, and however, it has a strong impact on marine mammals, but not only. So the idea was to create also, not necessarily to plot those information in real time, because you've got already a lot of things on that. But now to propose a way to construct a layer on a different time frame. So if I want to look at the IS on a 1 month or on a year at this point, and if I want to understand what is the transportation, for example, for ferries, that might be the faster type of ships, and this faster type of ships can have more collisions at the slower ships. So at this point, you can decide what type of ship and integrate it on the time frame you want to use. So in this case, for example, you've got a quick view made from those lines that obviously on this scale you don't understand the intensity, and we've got the calculator that integrates that on intensity. Another thing that we have developed, for example, was to propose what type of area is protected for the tourism that is doing whale watching. So the whales are, it's a species that people like to see in the environment, but we have no idea where whale watching are going on. So this layer was supposed to help us to track the boats, and this was done during 4 years, and it's showing the prospected areas. The orange and red ones are the area where they are putting 50% of the effort. So you can see, obviously it depends of the ports, but the boats are, in this case, are leaving from Alassio, Genova, and Sanremo, and you can see that they are not so spread. So in this case, if you understand that they are focused on this area, and this area represents a critical habitat for those species, at this point you need to engage a communication, a discussion with a whale watcher, maybe to spread it, because at the end, as I said, whales are not on the same point. They are moving a lot, so maybe we can discuss about it. Another thing about the collision, for example, is we have made this classified all the IS data from passenger ships. In this case, specifically about the ferries ships, and each color is a different line, and we tried to identify what was the width of each line, and according to the width, then we calculate an index of risk comparing to the habitat of the animals, and especially where we were seeing more animals. This is a result on the lines that we were monitoring, and all the red squares are the area where we have much more risk than the other. So this might be a starting point to discussion with the company in order to maybe slow down in those particular areas. Another thing that we're speaking a lot now with Inspire is what about citizens? There's a lot of people that going on the beach or going outside at sea and watch something. So we create a smartphone application made to simply plot what they see. I'm not saying that this is scientific. I'm not saying that this is truthful. But however, if they had a picture, maybe you can't understand if it's a confirmed sighting or not. For example, in this case, we use this smartphone application to understand if on one moment, specific moment, if we have an epidemic mass strandings of cetaceans. In this case, it's what's in 2 years ago on the Italian coast. A lot of striped dolphins strands, and we were wondering if we were called for striped dolphins or for a fish. So the app was helping to understand what was stranded. So if you confirm that the stranding is for dolphins, then you send the Coast Guard, and it's fine. If somebody make a mistake about the identification of the species, at this point you don't send the Coast Guard on the wrong place. One last part is about using also all the protected sites that are coastal. So in this case, they are much smaller, but much of the person doesn't even understand what kind of activities are allowed or not allowed. So in this case, we show one protected areas with 3 different types of zone. Zone A, B, C. The zone A is integrative. Zone C is the buffer area. And in this case, according to the different area, you've got an explanation of what is allowed and what is forbidden. At the end, you can an end user can directly upload a layer on the platform and publish it. And here is what we have done for the moment with SEAWETRA. So obviously, it's a prototype. The idea is we are a searching institute, so we try to propose some tools in order to develop what we can do for end users and national and international framework directives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very positive story. Very good. Questions in the public? Yes.
I'm Joris Andreas from the Satellite Research Institute in Toulouse. My question, since I have a little bit of knowledge regarding the marine mammal of the Pelagian area, the Pelagos area, sorry. I heard you spoke about the fin whale before and also the striped dolphin. Perhaps I didn't catch if you were referring to the migratory routes and if those routes are important of the marine mammals in order to determine the population. Because as far as I'm concerned, depending on whether we're referring to summer or winter and the human impact, the population diminishes or decreases. That's what's your take on it? And also, I saw like a column with the sperm whale and a study you've performed. And yeah, that would be perhaps if you could please explain a little bit further this about the fin whale. The sperm whale, the migratory or the habitat, and also I would be very interested in if you could please determine which are the private stakeholders that could be interested in such a tool. Because for me, somehow it's kind of hard to identify which companies or from a private sector, because from a public sector, obviously, if they have to comply with the Marine Spatial Planning Directive, they are bound by it. But from a private perspective, which companies or which type of sector would be interested in it? Thank you very much.
Okay, so in the case of the fin whale migratory routes, I would say for the moment not everything is clear. I mean, we know that it's animals that might spend some time during summer in the Pelagos Sanctuary, but then might move in the Italian southern parts during the winter. However, it's not so clear yet what kind of routes there are. So that's why for the moment, what the task force about protecting those animals is doing is mainly defining different protected areas that it's hard to say that those areas are made for only a season, because then it's impossible to get the stakeholder all together. So for the moment, we are trying to protect key areas in the Mediterranean Sea in order to increase the possibilities of conservation. But in the middle, to have a place on the migratory routes, it's really, we are not yet here. So that's why I'm saying at this point, I mean, fin whale, the problem of this map shows that if it's blue, we've got fin whale everywhere. This is what indicates this. Here you can see that there's blue everywhere, while the other, we don't see any blue. It means that here you can have a lot of sightings. However, where the sightings are concentrating is where the color changed. So in this case, you've got more sighting in this pixel, and at the same time, it's a pixel where you've got a lot of lines of ships traveling. So obviously, the risk increases. So that's why I'm saying, in this case, the protection should be everywhere, but we have to have, in this case, it's only ferries. If you had layer by layer commercial shipping going from Geneva, from the the other ports, but not being ferried, in this case it's only ferried, obviously the map changed a little. So this is a very, very first step. It's a preliminary story. For example, here you don't have anything, because at the end, if you look at the habit, this is offshore, and this is much more the shelf. So it means the probability to see the fin wall here is really low. That's why at the end, even if the intensity of the traffic is really high, you don't have such risk for the collision with the species. For sperm whale, the story is quite different. The sperm whale normally are much more concentrated than fin whale. And they're concentrated normally on continental slope. Or sometimes you can also find them in deep sea area, like in those cases. But we are not able yet to understand why they're concentrated. It might be all the traffic where, but what moment that explain why they are concentrated here. So this point was an overlapping of sighting, base point and base point. But however, the position of the sperm whale you can understand according to the blue and the red. So in this case, it seems that the risk is lower on sperm whale, but it doesn't. It's a relative risk. Be careful. The risk goes from 0 to 1. It's not. It's to compare the two, but it doesn't mean that the risk is lower from sperm whales.
I think that if the goal is to protect the marine mammal community, I think that this tool would be very useful if combined with a navigation tool. Because there are some institutes in Sri Lanka regarding the blue whale, and also in Australia regarding other marine mammal such as killer whales in the area, that combine navigational tools like in situ sensor implanted on one of the species to coordinate where is it, and define the migratory routes. So this project with a navigation tool would be perfect.
They are not using this kind of map, but there is already a tool to limit the collision. And in this case, the tool is made by report from the staff from the boat. That the report is connected to the other boats that take the same system. So they connect, they exchange information about the position. This is another type of information that maybe add to the tool, indeed. So this is a process that we had to discuss with navigation operators, obviously.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to ask if Bashkim Idrisi is in the room. No. Okay, then I would like to call for the last presentation, Stefan Arnold from the Federal Statistical Office of Germany.
Can I have a microphone to walk? Is it already open?
Yeah, just open.
Ah, okay. I see. Yeah, cool. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I will step down from the church's talking place. So, I will tell you now a bit about a data modeling concept that we have developed in a European working group. It's called EAGLE Group. And this was not done by myself, but by a far broader circle of land monitoring experts across Europe. So I'm just representing them here today. I'm talking about the background and motivation, why we started this initiative, speak a bit of the criteria and structure of the data model that we developed, give some examples of how we would do that semantic decomposition that I will explain later on, show some equal use cases, and summarize in the end. So the background was that to harmonize and integrate different data sources on land cover and land use, you need to have clear, understandable, and non-overlapping class definitions, which is not always the case. You probably want to have synchronized time intervals of when you capture the data. You would need comparable minimum mapping units, and also the data quality should be somehow comparable. So as the theme land cover and land use is applied in so many different fields of work and applications, and has every field of work has its own specific focus and emphasis on certain feature types in this catalog, results in many different kinds of classification systems which are not necessarily comparable among each other easily. So the effect is that you have within one nomenclature a mix of land cover and land use classes, and the lack of the comparability between those nomenclatures hampered and the exchange of information between datasets and nomenclatures. So, for example, forest. Everybody has an idea about forest in his mind, and if you take two criteria to define forest, which is one, the ground cover density and the minimum tree height, and in meters here and in percentage of area, and you look around the globe and you place a dot in combination of tree height and ground cover density, these are numbers, names of different countries around the world. So the guys in Zimbabwe will laugh about the forest definition of the guys in Kyrgyzstan, for example, or in Greece, because they have different perspectives on what they call a forest. So if you just want to merge polygons labeled with forest from different data sources together, it's a very distorted result. So the idea is, if you take a look at landscape, it's like you take a look at a glass of wine, maybe, because you see it's red and it's red wine, but what's inside precisely you cannot see, so you have to describe it. So if you take a bottle of wine and look at the back of the bottle of wine, you read from which region the wine comes, at which temperature it's served best, to which food it fits best, and what kind of aromas you would find in that bottle of wine. And they speak sometimes about cinnamon and chocolate and cherries and berries and whatever. Then you have an idea what kind of wine you are buying in the shop now. So if you're lucky enough, you can read the language on the back of the wine bottle, and then you understand what it's talking about. And in the shop, when the couple is searching his favorite wine for their supper, and he cannot find it because they changed the label of the wine bottle, so he doesn't know which wine to pick. But if on the backside they have still described the different aromas contained within that wine, he still can find his favorite wine. So transferred to landscape, if you talk about grasslands, similar like forest, it's not enough to call it red wine or broadleaf forest or permanent grassland. You need to somehow characterize the landscape, not so much classifying, but give more details on the characteristics of growth form, growth density, soil condition, function, land use, for example. This is permanent grassland in a football stadium, so you need to specify that a bit better. Another problem is when you have overlapping class definitions. So this is an area in the border between Sweden and Finland. Oh, we have someone from the house, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But this is how the landscape looks like, and if you want to describe that with a nomenclature of Korean land cover, you have two classes that may apply for this area. Here's the border. I hope you can see it. This is a zoom to it. And the same landscape in that area. In Sweden, it's classified as sparsely vegetated area because there are some rocky outcrops. And in Finland, it's specified as moors and heathland, which both is correct because the class definition of these two Korean cover classes allow the application of these two classes for that kind of landscape. So within the dataset of Korean land cover, you see the national border running through it, and you shouldn't because it's the same landscape. So not blaming Finland, neither Sweden, but it's the concept behind. So you have the same term for something which might express different meanings, or you have the same content, but it's given different names, so you would not even recognize that you're talking about the same thing. So then the question is, are data comparable or not? And that's why we came up around 2009, we gathered together European land monitoring experts within the Eagle Group, and we set up a list of criteria for a data model that should be fulfilled, which is a clear separation between land cover and land use terms of definition, It should be scale independent. It should be object-oriented, descriptive, not so much classifying with hard borders in definition. It should cover the themes land cover and land use completely and not only focusing on certain feature types. And we should be able to model temporal phenomena, so not land cover changes over time, but seasonal changes, like, for example, a skiing piste, which is used as a sports area in the wintertime, but in summertime it's permanent grassland where cows are grazing. So how do you classify that? With just one label, so you really can't. And it should be applicable on the national and European level. So the structure of the model, it was an Excel table in the beginning, was 3 blocks, which were the land cover components, the land use attributes, and some further characteristics that help to describe in more detail what's the land cover, what's the land use, or other parameters that neither apply for land cover nor land use. For example, spatial patterns. This is an information that might be helpful, or the status, and it's not necessarily a land use or a land cover type. That's the a wide screenshot of the Excel table that looks like. So you have here the land cover block, the land use attributes, and the further characteristics, and each column represents one model element. And then you can apply it for a nomenclature like Korean land cover, for example, and tick mark the elements that are relevant for each class going through the columns. So the vision we had was to kind of implement a new land monitoring concept, and that can have 2 main functions, which is one, a semantic comparison of definitions between different classification systems just by looking at the textual definitions, or if you go into landscape or have a look at satellite imagery or ortho photos and start to map landscape, but not classifying it, but delineating spatial objects and describing it with their characteristics and land cover components and land use attributes. That's the same thing, like I just said, the comparison of different nomenclatures, but more graphically shown. So we see the eagle concept in the middle of surrounded by applied and existing nomenclature systems, which can come from the national level or sub-national level and the European level, and you could then go ahead and take your national nomenclature for your land surveying initiative, decompose your class definitions by using the eagle vocabulary, and then try to rebuild classes where you can then derive Korean land cover classes, but you could also find your way to other classification systems like Lucas, for example, and then find out how good are they matching or not. And they are INSPIRE compliant. Okay, so the idea to illustrate it a bit more is take this twig of a coniferous tree and then pull the parts apart, and then you can sort it and then precisely describe what you have in hand here. So that's the view that we would take on landscape. And if you take that view on class definitions, these are 2 classes from Korean land cover, you find then words that refer to land cover, you find words referring to land use and to characteristics or parameters. Okay, so we then developed a UML data model, and giving that Excel spreadsheet a bit more sophisticated shape. And if you take a look at this golf course, for example, this is composed by different land cover components. So you have sand under the abiotic land cover components, you have vegetation like grasses and trees and shrubs, and you have the water surfaces. And they can all have their own characteristics. And they are forming together this land cover unit, which we now call a golf course, and through the land use attribute attached to the land cover unit, then you have your real golf course. And the whole data model of Eagle is constructed that way that it can be plugged on the INSPIRE data model for the theme land cover. So you have on top the land cover data set, here the land cover unit, and this is where the Eagle data model can be plugged onto. Same thing, a bit zoom further out, that's the inspired data model. Here's the way through the geometry, and then you can choose your abiotic, your biotic, or your water land cover components with their own land cover characteristics, and the land use is attached here to the land cover unit. An example, you have a rural settlement, a village. Again, everybody has a different imagination about how a village does look like, and if you have a polygon topographic map in the legend, it says rural settlement. You don't really know how it looks like, but if you describe it more precise with land cover components, like a conventional buildings, they can have a certain pattern. You have the land use, permanent residential. You also have land cover components like trees. They have a certain crown cover density and an average tree height in that area. Herbaceous plants you also find in this patch of land. Then the land use is different. It's not residential, but it's agricultural for commercial production or own consumption, and so on. And you have some open sealed surfaces. These are the roads. And the roads have the land use road transportation network. So then you have a more precise idea what's contained inside this spatial unit village. We also developed a web tool where you can do that a bit easier. So this is a screenshot of a result where you can create a nomenclature, create within the nomenclature a class, and then fill the class by mouse clicking with different land cover components, which you can choose from. Does it work here? From the top here, abiotic, biotic, or vegetation, water surfaces. Then these windows open, and then you can attach your land use to the component and also some characteristics on the component, which are then listed below here. 2 minutes, okay. So that's about the concept so far. I will brush through some use cases quickly. The EEA has thrown an eye on the concept, so they want us to develop some suggestions for the new Korean land cover process in the future, but I cannot come up with very much detail so far because we are still working on it. In Germany, there was an example from a Ministry of Environment within the federal state. They cooperate together with some people from the Institute of Agroscience, and they analyzed orthophotos with supervised classification, and they were applying the Eagle land cover components. And then here's the legend. So they were mapping it, and they want to derive through a database EUNIS habitat classification. So they give a lot of criteria to each of those small polygons, and when the query in the database concludes that this belongs to a certain habitat type, then a map can be created automatically. Another example was in Germany, where the National Association of Mapping Authorities decided they want to integrate a component of land cover within their own classification system, or the feature type catalog. And the Eagle matrix was applied to first analyze semantically what's in the schema so far through barcoding of the matrix, and then going back again and then suggesting a new feature type segment for land cover separated from land use. That's how it looks like in the matrix. So you have the different classes. This is forest with the attributes of the forest in the existing feature type catalog, and then tick marking the columns of the Eagle model, what's relevant for the class and whatnot. And you can do some statistics on that as well. Last example is from the German Space Agency. There was a lady, she was very happy that we came up with a model because she took the land cover components and extended the hierarchical structure even more to surface materials that you can find in urban areas. And with the hyperspectral satellite images, which were which were done artificially, so it's not flying yet, this bird. They can distinguish a lot of different types of urban surfaces for a lot of applications. And they're also using this kind of componential land cover description. Okay, so summary. The Eagle concept is an instrument for semantic analysis and comparison of class definitions. It's not a new classification system, but it's a vehicle for semantic harmonization between existing systems. It's INSPIRE compliant. It also can be used as a basis for a real mapping initiative. It would help to avoid redundant data capture, because from that mapped database you can derive different nomenclatures from one single database, maybe Korean classes or eUnits classes. It will work on raster cells as well as on polygons or grids. And it integrates the bottom-up approach with a top-down approach from the Commission. So some literature, list of use cases, you can check that further on. Website and group who was involved in this work so far. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Also very interesting, but I'm a suspect in this, so with the Copernicus. Yeah, I mean, you get the usual suspect. So are there any questions from the floor? Yes?
To verify the absurdity for the definition of forest in Greece. In fact, it really doesn't count the height of the tree, only the extent of the head, of the tree. First of all, I would like to note this, Mark. And secondly, I would like to ask how many stakeholders there have been, how many partners there were in this project, how long does it take, has been ended so far, and what's the budget of the project?
Here to the, is it on? Yeah. It started with a volunteered initiative among land monitoring experts. There was no budget. We had to ask our employers to let us go to the meetings and pay the flight and the hotel. Then it became a project, and the EA tendered out some contracts. They were lasting several months, up to 1.5 years maybe, and that was between 2014, 15, something. Then these contracts ended, and then we were waiting for a follow-up call for tender that we could continue the work, because the tolerance of our employees to always let us go to the meetings were exhausted, so there has to be some money to cover at least travel expenses. So nobody got rich in this. It was just about travel expenses and time that we spent with it. So, and just now there was another short contract where we are involved now in the further development of the CLC Plus, or future Korean land cover concept behind, which is now under work, and I think it will end again somewhere next year, mid next year or so. So it's a shift between keeping it alive by coming here and presenting stuff at the conference, and then having a contract which then ends as well. So.
Thank you very much. Just to add, this Korean Land Cover Plus is initiative that is being developed, actually. It has to be presented still to the Copernicus Committee in user form, but it is kind of revolutionary, because it will be minimum mapping unit of 0.5 hectares. And that fits in reporting to specific directive. A question, sir? Yes?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was very interesting, especially the slide where you showed that the Eagle matrix can help to transform the national concepts into European concepts and vice versa. It's a very interesting slide, because thanks to such mechanism, it would help to have complementarity between the European efforts and national efforts. So my question is, did you implement this transformation into national examples? For example, to create a pan-European data set from national data, did you make such an experiment? Thank you.
Sorry, what's it? Can't find it. Here. Okay, you're talking about this one. Yeah, we did a... Can I have the... Thank you. Thanks for the question. We had to deliver some proof of concept, some testing for the EA. They wanted to see some tangible results. So this Eagle concept was applied in the case of Hungary. So they selected an area, a test area. They took some national data sources like cadastral data, topographic data sets, also some imagery, and then they translated information that were extractable from each of these sources through the terminology of the Eagle concept to derive some Korean land cover classes, which was in principle possible, yes, but the result looked different from the conventionally produced Korean land cover polygons through visual satellite image interpretation. But if you take into account that you always have a bias between two image interpreters, so if you let them map the same area, you will also get a different result by applying the same rules. So yes, it has been somehow proved that it's technically doable, but there needs to be done, of course, some fine-tuning, and also important, it's dependent on the national data situation. Not every country has the same types of input data, so it will vary a bit, but still it's viable. It's a viable way.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I would like to close with a quick recap, but also to thank the different speakers. So the first presentation was from Roger Longhorn. The recap is that maritime spatial plans, they include activities, implementation foreseen for 2021, huge challenges. I looked for a positive point in your presentation. Inspire Conference is very useful for context and for your survey. Thank you very much. Next presentation from Lisa Schröder, Baltic Lines Project, the Pan-Baltic planning solutions for shipping routes and linear energy infrastructures. And you mentioned the use of Helcom's maps and data service. Once again, huge challenges in terms of Inspire data availability, and positive thing, a lot is going on. Then I would like to thank Aurélie Moulin. She talked about SEAWETRA, yes, multidisciplinary web platform for the conservation of, can I say it, mainly whales? Is that correct? Or dolphins, yes, correct. And what was very interesting is the mentioning of this citizen science application, Ushahidi? Yeah. Yes, okay, thank you very much. And then we had, then I would like to thank Stefan Arnold for his presentation on the Eagle data model, which is a vehicle for semantic harmonization. And from our side, from European Commission and EEA, we believe in it, so we're moving forward with this one. And then, of course, I would like to thank you, the public, for your attention and your interaction, and wish you a nice coffee break, okay? Thank you very much. position there as a GIS person, because we had said, as consultants, we had said, you really need to get an official. And he is actually the one who managed to do that. And we were still working